I think we're okay. I think we're ready to go. I've got a handout. Does everybody have the handout? I've made about 30 copies. So they're over there. Ain't it? So that you can go ahead and douse the lights, yeah. Yeah, let's go ahead and do it. Okay, let's get this show on the road here. Okay, thank you very much. So Steve contacted me a couple of weeks ago and asked me if I had anything going on that I'd like to share. And I said, you know, as a matter of fact, for years I've wanted to do star trail photography and just never got around to it, and I just started doing it. So I'm about 2 weeks into this, so I've made some mistakes and learned a few things, and I'm going to try to share those with you tonight. The main thing I want to do, but what I hope to accomplish, is to give you some tips on how to just shoot the night sky and how to make some nice, sharp, and well-exposed photographs of the night sky. And then take a lot of those and turn them into a star trail photograph. Let me move the video along here a little bit. Take images like the one you just saw, which was a single image, and then stack a bunch of them together into what's called a star trail photograph. This is actually in my backyard about 2 weeks ago, March 28th. It was a nice clear night. And really what star trail photography is much like waterfall photography, where we use long exposures and we smooth the water out and sort of compress that time of a couple of seconds into just a single image. Well, in star trail photography, that's the same thing. We're letting the stars move and taking a number of exposures and then merging them together to create this interesting pattern in the sky. And of course, it rotates around the North Star, or Polaris, if you're looking to the north, as I am out my back door. Rich lives on Canisius Lake, and this is a photograph that Rich took from his backyard. And we see the Milky Way up there. It's Rich's boat dock that you see in the foreground there. So I wanted to acknowledge some of the night photography that Rich has done that has really been amazing, and I've enjoyed seeing some of his Milky Way photographs. Also, I've seen some really amazing photographs that have been taken by Patty in our group. This is the aurora that occurred about 2 to 3 weeks ago. We had a pretty active aurora. She went up to Lake Ontario and photographed it. So this is nice. You can see the stars up in the sky, the nice green aurora, and some reflection in the water in the foreground. So let's talk about the still image and how to get a fairly sharp and well exposed single image. And then we'll talk about how to move forward and how to stack those into a group, and I'll show you how to do it. I'm going to do it all in Photoshop. What do you need to do this type of photography? And the thing is, you probably have the most important thing, and that's a digital camera that has the ability to shoot in manual mode. And most of the cameras that have been made in the last 2 to 3 years are really good about digital noise. They don't produce a lot of noise, and you're able to shoot at fairly high ISO, or ISO, is however you want to pronounce it. One question, by the way, that somebody asked me about this: why don't you just open the shutter for an hour and a half and let it take one shot? You can do that, and that's the way we did it back in the film days. The problem with that is, particularly with digital cameras, is your sensor heats up and you get a lot of digital noise that occurs. A lot of what's called hot pixels occur on the sensor. I'll show you those in a few minutes. And it tends to blow out the highlights. The longer you leave the shutter open, the more you blow out the highlights. And the stars are pretty bright little pinpoints of light. So we don't want to do that. And so it's better to shoot a series of shorter photographs, 15 to 30 seconds, and then stack them together in Photoshop, and then you don't blow out the highlights, and you don't overheat your sensor and create a lot of digital noise. And of course, you need a fairly dark location. Another thing you need is an intervalometer to shoot a series of photographs if your camera doesn't have an intervalometer. And even if it does, if it's a Nikon, some Nikons have intervalometers, and a few others do. I've heard someone say that even the built-in intervalometer in the Nikon cameras can be a problem to program. An intervalometer, if you don't know, is simply something that trips a shutter over a period of time at regular intervals. Makes sense? And they're really not expensive. The one that I have, and I have it up here, I'll pass it around later when we have some light so you can see it, costs $17 on eBay. You also need editing software for your photos and perhaps for your video. Photoshop software is a wonderful photo editing software, as we all know, but it also happens to be a video editing software, and a lot of people don't realize you can actually edit video in Photoshop. It does a pretty good job, and I'll show you that as we go through this. Obviously, you're going to leave your camera sitting for a long period of time. You need a tripod or set it on a table and block it up nice and solid against a window. But if you're shooting through a window, if you're shooting through glass, you need what's called a lens skirt. And I have one over here that I'll pass around again when we have the light on, but this is what a lens skirt looks like. It's a little hood that fits around your lens and sticks up against the window to prevent any reflections from inside your house from reflecting against the glass and coming back into the camera. Let's see here. I think I even have a picture here. There it is. There's my actual setup. There's my Canon 6D camera with the lens skirt attached to the front of the lens and stuck up against the patio glass door in our dining room aiming north. And let's see here. I believe I even shot a little video of it there. Yeah, there you can see the backyard and the house and the trees that you noticed in the video and in the time lapse that I showed. There it is. You notice a piece of tape on the lens? After I focus the camera, and I'm satisfied that I have a good sharp focus on the stars, I put a piece of masking tape on the lens so I don't change the focus as I bang things around and readjust the lens hood and that type of thing. So there's my setup, set up nice and low as you see and aimed up. You see the intervalometer hanging off of the side of it there.
Are you closing back where you look through the camera as well?
Yes, and in fact I don't think I had it in that view, but yes, I have the little piece that fits over the viewfinder so that you don't get any light leak into the back of it. But actually I turn all the lights off in the house anyway, so there's very little light that would ever come around. But if somebody happens to drive down the street and their light shines through the front window of the house, it could come in there and bounce off of the glass and cause a problem, or go through the viewfinder, the eyepiece that you look through to see. Light can actually leak in that way. Yeah, Luke.
Does the skirt actually stick to the glass?
Yeah, it's got little suction cups on it. Yeah, in fact, well, when they have the light, I'll show it to you, but it has little suction cups and pops right to the window. Very handy little thing. So here's your setup and shooting ideas. Charge your camera batteries. I think I said that because I probably made that boo-boo. In fact, I did. I set it up one night here recently, and it shot for about a half an hour and then died. I forgot to charge the batteries. Put fresh batteries in your intervalometer, and I have never had the intervalometer quit on me. These batteries last forever. Apparently, the intervalometer does not use a lot of electricity, and I've used batteries over and over and over and over and over again, but I would hate to be the one time that I really want to get a good photograph and they happen to die. So I usually, after about 3 or 4 times, I put fresh batteries in the intervalometer. It uses a couple of AAAs. And another little boo-boo that I made is I failed to format my memory card one night. So again, I shot for about 30 or 45 minutes and the camera shut down while I was asleep. And I had forgotten to erase and format my memory card, so it filled up, and that was the end of that. So don't make that mistake. You're learning from my boo-boos here. So we're going to set up your camera for night shooting and shoot the stars. Here are the settings. These are the settings that I use. You slip into manual mode, as I said. I tend to be an aperture priority kind of guy, and I keep wanting to try to shoot an aperture priority, and it just doesn't work. Go into manual mode, turn your autofocus off. You're going to focus one time manually, and then tape that focus ring down and have it. And I'll tell you how to focus in a minute. I know you're there thinking, how in the world do you focus on a star? I'll tell you how to do it in just a minute. Another thing to do is to turn off your image stabilization or vibration reduction, as it's called, and on Nikon. Now, there's some discussion as to whether you need to do that or not when you have your camera on a tripod. Just be sure that your lens or your camera is not trying to stabilize an already stable image and cause instability in the process. It tends to do that if you have the stabilization turned on. Another thing to do is to use the widest aperture that your lens will allow. In my case, it's an f4. And the idea is that you want to let in as much light as possible. And I suggest starting at ISO 1600. Almost any camera made today can shoot at ISO 1600, and not create enough digital noise to cause a problem. Any camera made in the last 2 or 3 years can shoot at ISO 1600. Now, when we go out to Hemlock Lake, Rich and I, we'll usually start at 3200 because we're taking shorter exposures. like 15 seconds. But in this case, I shoot at 25 to 30 seconds, so an ISO of 1600 seems to work to just about the right exposure. Turn off your long exposure noise reduction that you have on your camera. Long exposure noise reduction is a method that the cameras use to reduce noise in the images. What it does is after you take let's say a 30-second exposure, your camera then shuts down and takes another 30-second exposure, a dark exposure, leaving the shutter closed, and then does some calculations to calculate where the noise is on the sensor and then cancel it out. Well, if you're doing that, then you're going to get a 30-second exposure, then 30 seconds of nothing. And then another 30-second exposure, then 30 seconds of nothing. So turn it off. There's really not enough noise to worry about anyway. You don't need long exposure noise reduction anymore. It's almost a thing of the past. You will end up with what's called hot pixels, and I'll show you those when we get to the images in a minute. And we can eliminate those manually. It's really not a big problem. And focus on a star. So I know, here comes the question, how in the world do you focus on a star? Now with my Canon and with most cameras you can do this. You turn on live view on your camera. And when you turn on live view and you're looking at your LCD on the back of the camera, you don't see any stars, but you probably have a magnification setting. On Canon it's the little Q, and I hit that one time and it goes to times 10, hit it again, I think it goes to times 50 or something. It really magnifies it. Then I can spin the camera around till I find a good bright star, and sure enough I can see a star on the LCD. I take the focus ring, I spin it till I get it nice and sharp, and then I tape it down at that point, and I know that I've got a good sharp focus on the stars. If you really want to verify it, take one shot and then review the image on your LCD. Hit the image review, chimp it as they say, and take a look at the resulting image and make sure that it's sharp. And every time I do, it's nice and sharp. Another thing is, should I shoot RAW or should I shoot JPEG? Here we go, Steve. I know you were waiting for this, I know. Here we go. The advantage of shooting JPEG, of course, is you have smaller files and they're quicker write time to the memory card and faster post-processing when you bring the images into Photoshop or wherever you edit them. No doubt that works. With RAW, you know, I tend to shoot RAW. Everybody knows that, I'm sure. And I like the fact that you have more image information. You're able to work with it later with the ability to do better adjustments on your white balance and your color and so forth. You know what I found is a pretty good compromise is Canon has the ability to shoot what's called small RAW files. I can set my Canon camera to RAW, medium RAW, or small RAW. And the small RAW files give me a little bit of the advantage of both. At least it makes the files considerably smaller, yet I still have the ability to make the white balance adjustments and the noise reduction that I like to do in Camera Raw. And here are the file sizes for my Canon 6D. The JPEG file is 6 megabytes, or a small RAW file is 13 megabytes, so it's about twice as big, but still fairly small. Compared to the regular large RAW files that are 24 megabytes, that's still a pretty significant difference. I find that works pretty good. Of course, it increases your processing time because then you have to take the RAW files and convert them to JPEGs to put into your movie folder or whatever you do. I'll show you that in just a minute. Other considerations? Take off all the filters, even that coveted UV filter that you have on the front of your camera that the camera store sold you to protect your lens. Take it off because you're going to get some reflections from a UV filter and you certainly don't need a polarizer at night. So take off the filters and just shoot with a naked lens. If you're shooting outside, you might want to consider a rain cover or maybe a hand warmer to keep the lens from developing dew or frost. And to show you what happens, in fact, Rich and I have had this occur down on Hemlock Lake when we shot down there. You start to get dew on your lens as the night goes along. But anyway, to keep dew or rain off of your camera, buy some type of a storm cover, a rain cover for your camera so that you don't get it wet, the dew or the rain. And you may want to put that hand warmer under the lens. Just take one of those little chemical hand warmers and put a rubber band around it and put it on the bottom of your lens. The idea is just to keep the lens just a little bit warmer than the outside temperature, then you don't get dew that forms on the front of the lens. That camera, by the way, you see has a battery grip on the bottom of it. This is not my camera. This is a photo I borrowed off of the internet. But I have a battery grip on my camera. What a battery grip does, it has two batteries in it so that it gives you twice as much shooting time. Okay, here, set your intervalometer. You need to program your intervalometer, and my suggestion is take lots of short exposures. The more the better. You can always use less than you shot, but you can't create shots that you didn't take. No, that's not totally true. You can actually create some shots. With Photoshop, we can do some magic. I'll show you a little magic in a few minutes here. And allow a few seconds between your shots for your camera to write the file to the memory card. So I'd like to shoot, what I've been shooting is about a 25-second exposure. There are my settings. I set the interval on my intervalometer to 37 seconds. I said 25. Actually, I've been shooting 30-second exposures on the camera. So if my camera shoots for 30 seconds, then I need about 4 or 5 seconds for the camera to write that information to the memory card, and then another couple of seconds for the camera to recover and be ready to take the next shot. And I have found 37 seconds to be the ideal interval, so that I can shoot for 30 seconds, let the camera write the information to the memory card, and then prepare and pop the next exposure off. So those are the settings that have been working well for me. Now, the exposure setting time on the intervalometer is only 1 second. In other words, when the camera is set up, I set the manual exposure to 30 seconds. So if I was doing it without an intervalometer, and I just had the camera sitting on a tripod, and I reached up with my finger, I would just push the button and walk away, and it would shoot for 30 seconds. Well, that's what the intervalometer is doing. I set it for 1 second, meaning push the button for 1 second, and the camera continues to go for 30 seconds, and then ready for the next one. That might be a little confusing for you, but if you'll think about it for a minute, the alternate would be to go to the bulb mode on your camera and then set the intervalometer for 30 seconds to hold it open. But it's easier for me just to set the camera for 30 seconds and then let the intervalometer trip the shutter for 1 second, and then it records for 30 seconds. You'll think about it. It'll make sense in a minute. Trust me. Trust me. And for the period, no limit. Don't set a period on it. I just let it go until the memory card is full or the batteries die, whichever comes first, or the sun rises the next morning, and then it's done. I get up in the morning, go in, turn on the coffee pot, and then start taking the batteries out and the memory cards out and start going. So there we go. There's a single image, and this one happens to be converted to black and white, by the way. I have found a lot of times that my color images have a little too much information in them. And the human eye really doesn't see a lot of color in low light anyway. We pretty much see in monochrome at night. So I have converted my images to black and white, and that way any stray colors that are out there, we don't have to deal with them. Sure.
Do you shoot in black and white or convert?
No. No, I mean, I'm shooting in RAW, so I'm capturing the color information and just converting to black and white later as I do it. Mm-hmm.
Carl,
Yes.
do you ever use the mirror up 1 or 2 second time delay to minimize any?
Use the mirror up and a 1 or 2 second time delay. If I was taking just a single image, yes. And, you could do something like that, but you'd have to reset it.
Necessary for this?
I'm sorry?
You don't think it's necessary for this series?
No. No, for mirror lockup, no. The extra battery that you use, I mean, the mirror's up all the time during the exposure. If you had it locked up during that little 7-second period between one shot and the next one, you're using a little bit more battery life, but not a significant amount.
Carl,
Yes.
I know you can put it black and white, but the stars actually are colored.
Yeah, well, they really are colored. Certain stars have certain color aspects to them. You'll see some that have a red glow to them, some that have a yellowish glow to them, because they are suns and they do have some varying colors. But mostly we don't see the color greatly as we're looking up at the sky at night. We see white and black pretty much. So that's why I've been converting some to black and white. I do have some in color too. I'll show you. But anyway, those are the images. Let me show you, before we run out of time here, let's go over and do some editing on some of these images very quickly. I'm going to use Photoshop to do some editing, and I've loaded my files into Adobe Bridge. I'm not a Lightroom user, as most of you probably know. I'm a Bridge and Photoshop user.
If you can stack the photos in Lightroom, or is that
Well, at least the image organization you can do in Lightroom.
stacking them?
As far as stacking them, I don't know if you could do that in Lightroom or not. Since
Elements might.
Elements probably, because you can do it.
No?
Since I'm not a Lightroom, okay, no stack. Yeah, I thought you could do layers in Elements, so I would think you could stack them. I bet you can, and then use the blending mode. I would be surprised that you couldn't do it in Elements. I would think you could. very briefly, what I did, in this case, if you notice down at the bottom, well, you can, there's some shadows down there, but it says 821 items. So this is 821 raw files in this folder. And if I processed all 821 images, we would be here until 4 o'clock in the morning. It takes forever to process that many. I'm just going to do 4 or 5 just to show you how it works. What I've done is select the first 5 images from the sequence here. That's the first 5 raw files. So you notice I have a little folder in the upper left corner that says Process JPEGs. I put that folder as a subfolder so that when I process my images, I can put them into the JPEGs into that folder. So here are my raw files. I'm going to right-click, open these in Camera Raw. Now these 5 images have appeared in Adobe Camera Raw, and this will look similar to Lightroom to those of you who use Lightroom. It's the same processing engine in Adobe Camera Raw as you'll find in Lightroom. So I've selected those 5 images, and the first thing I like to do is go to my Lens Correction tab, click on that, and go to the Profile tab that's under that and enable Lens Profile. By doing that, you'll see my lens pops up there. You notice it says Canon EF 24-105. That's the lens that I shot. So Adobe Camera Raw knows that I shot with that particular, it read the EXIF data, and it has made the corrections for that particular lens. And that lens has some oddities in it. It has a little bit of dark corners, some vignetting that it does. It also has a little bit of a pin cushion effect, and you'll see when I turn it off and back on what it does. There's with the lens correction off, there's on. There's off and there's on. You notice how it tends to balloon out just a little bit in the middle, and the corners become lighter when I enable the lens correction. Another thing I like to do with all of my raw files is click on the Color tab and decide if I need to remove chromatic aberration. Chromatic aberration are those odd color edges that you get around the when bright and dark areas, the areas of contrast show up. And a good place to look at that is to go up here to the North Star. Let's go to Polaris and zoom in. And if we look at Polaris, you see a little bit of blue above it. That is chromatic aberration. So if I turn the chromatic aberration control on and then raise this purple amount slider a little bit, you'll see that blue go away. You see there's before and there's after. So that takes care of that chromatic aberration. And something to do there, something that's important. You might notice there is some digital noise in here. Again, I shot this at ISO 1600. There is some digital noise that appears in the image. So if I go to this tab over here called the Detail tab, I can go to the Luminous Noise Reduction, move that tab up a little bit, and knock that noise right down. And you really won't see it in the finished product. It'll be so small. Now another thing, let's switch over to the Basic tab over here. Let's see here. Let's fit this back in view here. One thing I like to do is roll the dice and see what the auto button does, and see what comes out of here. You never know. Let's hit auto and see what happens. So I click the auto button, and Adobe Camera Raw has taken a wild stab at what it thinks will be some good changes to that raw file. I think it overexposed it, to tell you the truth. I think it went too far. So I'm going to take the exposure, pull it back down to where it was, down to 0. Just double click on it, and that'll take it back to 0. The color is not quite right. I know I'm looking at the color on my screen, and you're looking at it up there. And actually, up on the screen, it looks a little better to what it is. It was a little more on the blue side. So I'm going to lower my color temperature down a little bit. I'm again looking at it on my screen now. It's a little more toward the blue. It looks a little more like I saw it out there. The other thing I might want to do is raise that contrast just a little bit. That makes the stars pop out a little bit. Now I like to also hit synchronize and make sure that I've synchronized all of my changes, even though I selected all it should have done it, but for some reason it never quite seems to synchronize unless I hit the synchronize button again. Shouldn't have to do that, but for some reason I do.
That was for the first 5 images?
Yeah, so these are just the first 5 images. That's all I'd have. It's going to take it about a minute to process these. Let me send them out here. I'm going to go down to the button at the bottom that says Save Images. I'm going to not save in the same location. I'm going to save in a new location, and the new location is that folder that I told you about called Process JPEGs. And so I'm sending these out as JPEG files and applying just a little bit of default sharpening. You can't see it down here at the bottom, but a little bit of sharpening. Let me save those 5 files. And while it does that, let me tell you that if I was processing all 821 files, it would be an all-day process. And I would start it and walk away and go to the grocery store and have lunch and take a nap and come back to have dinner. And then they would be done. Likewise, when I get it into Photoshop and I start to merge the layers, it's the same process. It's a long, long process. And this particular computer I'm using right here, it only has 6 gigabytes of RAM. My computer at home has 16 and it's slow. You probably need 32 or even 64 gigabytes of RAM to do this in any sort of expeditious manner. Let me click done here. Now you'll see the images update in my in Adobe Bridge there. So basically, if I go to the next image in the sequence, there's before and there's after. So that's basically the changes that I made. Let's go over to the process JPEGs now. Here are the 5 images I just. So let's take these 5 images and I'm going to tell it to load these into Photoshop layers. You see, again, if you're a Lightroom user, this is a little different process. But in Bridge, I've selected the images. I've gone to Tools, down to Photoshop, and I'm telling it to load these files into Photoshop layers. Here they go. This is good. Now you're seeing Photoshop CC2014, and it's loading those 5 images into the layers palette over there. So now I have my 5 images in layers. If I highlight those 5, let me change the view to 100% so you can see what happens when I do this. Now you can see those stars up close there. If I change the blending mode from normal to lighten, we suddenly have star trails. Now, what I did right there was instantaneous. If I had 821 files up there, again, that would be an all-day process. It would take forever. And if you zoom in on them, you'll see what occurs here. Let's just, whoops. Let's flatten that here so we can zoom in a little bit. Oh, I could have zoomed in without doing that, come to think of it. All right, let's zoom right in here. If you look at one of these, I went in a little too close there. Let's back out a little bit. Look at one star. You notice that you see 5 dots because those are 5 exposures that are strung together. And that little space between them is that 7 seconds from the time that one exposure stops until the next exposure picks up. There are other stacking software programs. One's called Star Stacks that supposedly eliminates those little gaps between the stars. I tried it, didn't seem to work for me, and now somebody yesterday told me about another software program you can use that does an even better job that's supposed to eliminate those. I'm not sure that it's that important because when you get them all laid out there and the image is at full size, it looks pretty normal. So let's see here. Let's step backward here for a minute. Let's go back to full size, fit on screen. So that's how you would merge them into making one of those star trail photographs like you see. And by the way, there are those hot pixels in it. Let me go back here for a minute. Let's do it one more time. And now let's zoom in on one of these areas over here and let's look for some of those hot pixels. There ought to be some in here somewhere.
Will that pixel always show up in red?
Not necessarily. Sometimes they're blue, sometimes they're white. But once you merge the layers together and you've created the star trails, the hot pixels don't move. So they're real obvious. And right here is one. You can see one right here. So the stars have moved, but the hot pixel, the distortion that the image sensor has provided me here, this little bright dot, stands out like a sore thumb once you merge those layers and you can see the star trails.
Second half of the question is, will it always be in the same spot?
They will pretty much, although over a period of time a new one may develop, John. In other words, you may see a dot here, and then if you shot for 2 or 3 or 4 hours and the sensor is heated up, and it may create a new one that starts to appear up in this area. So once you blend all these images together and flatten the layer, flatten all the layers, then you go in and take your spot healing brush and let's see here, let's flatten those layers here so we can do that, and just go in here and get rid of them. Click, spot healing brush, and away they go. So you can do that. Now I want to show you a couple other things real quick here while we're in this area. Let's step backward here. I could have gone to the history panel and done this, but let's see here. Let's go view, fit on screen. Let's say you wanted to turn that into an animated GIF. I did a program a couple of months ago about doing animated GIFs. Steve, you weren't here for that, but nevertheless, I'm going to show you real quickly how you would do that. You would select the layers, and if you don't know, as I mentioned earlier, Photoshop will edit video. And if you go to the window down here where it says timeline, it actually puts you into the video editing mode in Photoshop. Down at the bottom is a little tab that says Create Frame Animation. I'm going to kind of move fast through this because this may not be anything that you're interested in, but I want to show you quickly how to do it. And also just make you aware of the fact that Photoshop will edit video and allow you to create animated GIFs and actually export MP4 video files. So I'm going to click on this Create Frame Animation. When I do that, there's a little tab that comes up here in the corner. I can click on that, and it says Make Frames from Layers. When I click on this, now the 5 frames are down below. If I highlight them, tell it that I want each one of these frames to play for, say, 0.2 seconds. And I'm going to change the, you can't really see down, yeah, it says once. I'm going to change that to forever. Hit the little play button. You know what I should do is put it at 100% so you can see what's going on. See what it's doing? So it's actually playing, and you could now, that's actually backwards, by the way. You notice that it's rotating the wrong way? The reason is Photoshop loads the layers backwards for some reason. So you highlight the layers, you can go over here to this little tab, again, this little pull down, and put reverse frames. Now it'll play the correct direction, which is they rotate counterclockwise around the North Star. So now we're rotating around the North Star. You can see the hot pixels too. You see them right here and here that are sitting there that are not moving. Now, if I wanted to then export that as an animated GIF, a GIF, you would go to File, Save for Web, and it would bring up the export dialog box to tell you how to save it. And it's a very complicated interface. None of it's really important to you when you're exporting a GIF file. I won't go into how to do it, but you would just click Save and away it would go. But let's just skip that for the time being because I want to show you another thing you can do, which is to convert this to a video, to a MP4 video file. Down in this little tab again, you can say Convert to Video Timeline. Click on that, and now you have a video timeline. If I click on the play button, hopefully it'll play. Where is it? There it goes. So now it's actually playing a video of those 5 frames. Imagine if you had 821 frames, you could do that. And then you can go down to this little tab and say Render Video, and it'll come up with a window that allows you to choose the settings that you need to use to export your video. And you could name your video file and export it as a high-quality H.264 video file. All those things are things that you can do. You can take a single image and then take multiple single images, of these single exposures and turn them into a star trail photograph. You can take those layers and turn them into an animated GIF, and you can also take those and turn them into a video file. And then I found after I did all of this a couple of days ago, I was doing a little bit of poking around on the internet about some of the things that you could do, and somebody showed me how to do all of this with a single image. Said you don't need to use an intervalometer and take 800 shots at night, but use a single image and turn it into star trails. And I said, oh, come on. You mean I spent all this time learning how to do this? So I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to take just about 2 or 3 more minutes, if that's okay, and speed this thing up. And I'm going to go back over here, and I'm going to take Rich's, one of Rich's photographs, that one that I showed you. And this is different. No, this is the one I showed you, of the Milky Way over Canisius Lake, and I'm going to pull that into Photoshop here. Here it is. Kurt asked me earlier about Photoshop actions. He said he'd heard something about Photoshop actions. If you don't know what an action is in Photoshop, an action is where you can record a series of steps that you make to edit a photograph or do whatever procedure, and then click the play button and repeat that over and over and over again. So that's what a Photoshop action is. So what I'm going to do is a quick Photoshop action here. And to do that, I'm going to open up my action palette right here by clicking on this little button, and this swing out menu pops out here. And down here, this little folder with the tab on the corner says Create New Action. So I'm going to create a Photoshop action here. Click on that, and I'm going to name this Star Trails. And I'm going to start recording. So now Photoshop is going to record everything that I do. Let's see if I can do this now. The first thing I'm going to do, Steve always tells me, duplicate the layer. So I'm going to Control J, and that duplicates the layer, makes a copy of the layer. I'm going to hit Control T, and I normally don't use keyboard shortcuts, but I'm going to do it right now just for the sake of argument here. Control T is transform. So now I'm going to be able to transform this image. It's a little hard to see here. Let me close that panel for a second so we can see what we're doing. At this point in my live presentation, the gremlins of using a projector came into play, and I was unable to finish the demonstration of creating star trails through a Photoshop action. The projector I was using has a different aspect ratio than the screen of my laptop computer, and so it compressed the Photoshop window, and I couldn't access all the tools I needed for the demonstration. I've completed the last couple of minutes of my demonstration on my home computer, and I want to thank you for your understanding of how I've overcome this technical glitch. So now what I'm going to do is go to this little window at the top of the Photoshop screen that indicates the angle of rotation that I'm going to apply to this transformation. It's currently at 0.00. I'm changing it to 0.1. That means that when I click this check box over here, this image has rotated 1/10 of 1 degree. It's such a small amount of change that you don't really see it. I'm going to go up to the layers panel and change the blend mode to lighten. And then I'm going to go down to this little square box and click that, and that stops recording the action. So now that action, every time I click the play button, it's going to play that Photoshop action which rotates the image 1/10 of 1 degree. So I'm going to start clicking the play button over and over again, and each time I do it, the image is going to rotate a little bit more each time. So here we go. Let's start clicking away at it and you'll see what happens. Actually, I need to put the view at 100% so you can see the stars up close and see what happens as I click the play button. So there I click it again and again and again and again, and each time I click it, do you notice the star trails are beginning to appear? I'm twisting this image around the central point there, which is not really Polaris. That's not really the North Star. That just happens to be the very center of the image. I could have picked that little center target and put it on any star in the image, and it would have rotated all the stars around it. So now I'm going to click on the view to view this full screen so you can see what we've done. And there you can see all those star trails. Let's flatten those layers. I may go over here and click flatten the layers. And now we see, well, it's almost a finished image, except we also moved all the foreground. Rich's dock is now all skewed. So let's fix that by saving this image as version 2 of Rich's image. Just change the name and put a 2 on it and click save. And now let's go back and pull up the original image that Rich sent to me. We'll click open. Here it comes. And now there it is right there. Click on that. So now we have the original image. Let me put it full screen. There it is, full screen. There's the original image. Let me close the little panel over here. And here's the modified image. Well, I tell you what, let's do. Let's go ahead and merge these two into a layer stack. I'm going to tell Photoshop to put these two images into a layer stack. And when I click OK, we now have one image on top of the other in layers. And I'm going to put an adjustment mask on here, pick up my paintbrush tool over here, and paint black over the bottom of this image and reveal the unmodified image that's below this one that I twisted around. I'm going to make the brush size larger so you can see what I'm doing. So I made the brush larger. Now I'm revealing Rich's original image, the foreground part of it, and leaving the stars twisted above it. And there we go. In the interest of time, we need to shut this thing down and give Rich some time here to do it. So let's just put a stop to it right there. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. You're welcome.